Alcatraz Island holds a chilling legacy, not just as a prison, but as a place where suffering has left a permanent mark on its walls and silence. From the moment one approaches the rocky island, surrounded by the icy waters of San Francisco Bay, an eerie stillness seems to descend. The wind howls in unnatural tones, and the air grows heavier, almost as if the island itself resents being disturbed. What once stood as a military outpost transformed into one of the most feared prisons in American history. And though the bars are rusted and the cells now sit empty, the island feels very much alive, only not in the way one expects. Alcatraz has a presence that cannot be touched, yet it wraps around every visitor like a thick fog. Its walls, though weathered by time, seem to whisper stories that were never fully told, and its silence doesn't soothe. It screams. For many who visit, it's not the physical remains of the prison that leave the deepest impression. It's the sense that something else lingers, watching and waiting. The suffering of the inmates, their cries, fears, and final thoughts, seem to have soaked into the very concrete of the corridors. Every echo feels exaggerated. Every creak of the metal gate resonates like a warning. Time behaves differently here. Some visitors have spoken of entering certain parts of the prison and feeling lightheaded, dizzy, or deeply anxious for no logical reason. It's not just fear of history, it's fear of something unseen, something that refuses to be forgotten. Former guards and workers have long whispered stories of strange events, doors shutting by themselves, phantom footsteps pacing at night, and unseen forces that cause sudden drops in temperature. These are not tales told to spook tourists. Many of these accounts come from men known for their discipline and rationality, men who managed some of the most dangerous prisoners in U.S. history. One retired officer once described feeling a breath on the back of his neck in an empty hallway, and hearing his name whispered in a cell block completely void of inmates. Such experiences were shared behind closed doors, not because they weren't real, but because they were too real to be dismissed. There's something about the silence on Alcatraz that is unnerving. It isn't the peace of a deserted place, it's a strained silence, like someone holding their breath. The cries that once rang through these halls may have stopped decades ago, but their echoes remain. Imagine being confined in a 5-foot cell with nothing but a small sink, a steel cot, and the sound of your own thoughts. Multiply that by years, then add the weight of hopelessness, the isolation from the world, the knowledge that escape is impossible. These walls didn't just witness pain, they fed on it, they became stained with it. Some say that trauma leaves an energetic fingerprint, a kind of psychic imprint on places where intense emotions have been felt. If that is true, then Alcatraz is drenched in it. Every corner of the island seems to carry the weight of anguish. It is more than history, it is a graveyard of invisible wounds. It wasn't just a prison for the body, it became a cage for the soul. This is why many believe Alcatraz is still inhabited, not by flesh and blood, but by memories too strong to fade and energies too bound to be released. And even though tours now bring thousands of people each year, it is rare to find one who leaves unaffected. Some feel drained, others disturbed. Some feel as though they're being watched the entire time. The legacy of Alcatraz doesn't end with its physical closure in 1963. The island didn't simply shut down and fall silent. It shifted. It evolved into something that defies understanding, became a monument not just to incarceration, but to spiritual residue. The stories, the screams, the regrets, all of them hang heavy in the air. You don't just visit Alcatraz, you experience it, and for many that experience follows them long after they leave the shore. Visitors and former guards have reported paranormal experiences, including footsteps, voices, cold spots, and a heavy, unsettling atmosphere throughout the island. These aren't mere tales told in the dark to excite tourists. They are real, recurring, and often described by individuals who had no prior belief in the paranormal. What makes these accounts chilling is the consistency of the details across time and witnesses. People who have never met, from different walks of life, describe eerily similar sensations, as if the island itself orchestrates the experience. From the moment one steps off the ferry and begins walking up the cracked path toward the prison entrance, a strange feeling begins to settle in, a pressure in the chest, a tightening in the throat, a heightened sense of alertness. It's not fear in the usual sense, it's anticipation of the unknown, a sense that something invisible is observing from the shadows. Former guards, many of them hardened veterans used to dealing with violent and unpredictable inmates, often refused to walk certain hallways alone at night. Some recall hearing the unmistakable sound of boots echoing down the corridor, only to turn and find it empty. They would do rounds, convinced that an inmate had broken out or that someone else was present. When nothing was found, they stopped reporting these occurrences, not because they stopped happening, but because they couldn't explain them. To many, the sounds seemed to come from nowhere, yet echoed with unmistakable clarity. Footsteps pacing back and forth, steel doors rattling, faint murmurs that couldn't be pinned to any living person. Tourists have had similarly eerie experiences, often before knowing the haunted reputation of Alcatraz. Many have described feeling cold bursts of air in rooms where there are no vents or drafts, even during warm weather. These cold spots are sudden, almost surgical, like stepping into a different climate within a few feet. One moment, everything is normal. The next, it feels like standing inside a freezer. What's more disturbing is that these chills are often accompanied by a sense of being watched or even touched. Some visitors claim to have felt fingers brushing against their necks or tugging at their clothing, only to turn around and find no one nearby. In cell block A and the old hospital wing, these sensations grow stronger. Guests walking through these areas have fainted, broken into tears, or rushed out in panic without understanding why. Some have reported hearing their names whispered in the wind or voices speaking directly into their ears, whispers so clear they thought someone was standing behind them. One woman, recounting her visit to the infirmary, said she heard the labored breathing of someone in pain even though she was entirely alone in the room. Another tourist said she felt something grab her hand and pull it forward while standing in a hallway known for intense ghostly reports. When she described the incident to a guide, the guide nodded and said, "That hallway takes something from almost everyone." Some areas of the prison, like the old warden's house and the control center, are no longer open to the public due to structural damage. Yet even from a distance, people say they can hear piano music playing or catch glimpses of shadowy figures moving behind broken windows. These aren't just random tricks of light or noise. They repeat again and again, as though playing on a loop, as if the building itself is replaying moments from a different time. It's not about whether you believe in ghosts. It's about the undeniable energy that radiates from certain places on that island. The haunting experiences on Alcatraz don't feel like a performance for visitors. They feel like the residual screams of a place that has known too much pain. Some locations in the world carry energy that defies logic or explanation. Alcatraz isn't content to rest as a relic of history. It demands to be felt. The voices in the halls, the steps that echo without a body, the chills that creep into your bones. These are not accidents. They are imprints of the forgotten, the punished, and perhaps the condemned who never truly left. Cell 14D, a solitary confinement cell on Alcatraz Island, has long been the center of intense paranormal speculation. It is not just another cold, empty prison cell. It is a chamber of psychological torment, soaked with the fear, isolation, and desperation of those who were once locked inside. Known among former inmates and guards as the Hole, this particular cell was reserved for the most defiant prisoners, those who refused to follow the rules or posed a threat to others. In this windowless, pitch-black room, prisoners were stripped of all comfort. No contact, no light, no sound, except for the racing of their own minds. Time became meaningless, and many broke within hours. Others emerged changed, mentally fractured, carrying trauma that haunted them for life. But some say the haunting didn't stop with the men who left the cell. Something remained behind, something that feeds off the fear that once filled those walls. Reports from former prisoners speak of terrifying experiences during their time in cell 14D. Some described an overwhelming sense of not being alone, even though the space was so tight they could barely move. Many said they felt a cold breath on their necks or saw glowing eyes staring at them from the darkness. One particularly chilling story comes from an inmate in the 1940s who screamed all night, claiming a creature with glowing eyes was watching him. They screamed all night, claiming a creature with glowing eyes was watching him. Guards dismissed it as hallucination, the result of prolonged isolation, but by morning the man was found dead, his face frozen in a mask of horror, his body twisted as though he had tried to fight something no one else could see. The autopsy showed no signs of physical trauma. He hadn't been beaten or strangled. It was as if he died of pure terror. This incident was not isolated. Over the years, countless accounts have emerged from those who spent time in cell 14D. Some remember hearing whispers, soft, unintelligible voices that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Others claimed they were touched, even grabbed, by unseen hands. One man insisted that the temperature in the cell would drop drastically, even in summer, and that his breath would become visible in the pitch dark. He said it was as if something cold and ancient lived in that space, something angry. The guards didn't argue. Many of them avoided entering that cell, especially alone. Some even refused to do rounds near it during the night shift. They too had felt the chill, heard the faint groans, and felt the unmistakable sense of being watched. Even in recent years, long after the prison closed, tourists and paranormal investigators have been drawn to cell 14D, many leaving disturbed and shaken. Some have fainted. Others report sudden headaches, chest tightness, and overwhelming feelings of sadness or rage as soon as they step inside. Modern equipment has registered unexplained electronic bike spikes, temperature anomalies, and even voices picked up through EVPs, electronic voice phenomena that seem to say things like, "Help me" or "Get out." Visitors describe a strange pressure in their ears, as though the air itself is heavier in that cell. Cameras malfunction, batteries drain instantly. Some report blurred vision or dizziness that vanishes the moment they leave the room. What makes cell 14D so chilling is not just the number of accounts, but the consistency. Story after story, year after year, people describe the same sensations: the cold, the eyes, the overwhelming dread. These are not stories inspired by suggestion or urban legend. They are experiences shared by people who had no reason to lie, no prior knowledge of what to expect. Some were skeptics who walked in laughing and walked out pale, shaken, and silent. There is a darkness in that cell that cannot be explained away by psychology or architecture. Something about the room feels alive, not in a physical sense, but in a spiritual, energetic one. Like the suffering that once filled it never left. Like the fear never stopped echoing. Many believe that certain locations absorb emotional energy, especially extreme pain or terror. If that's true, cell 14D may be one of the most concentrated places of spiritual residue in the world. It doesn't need chains, ghosts, or flickering lights to prove its power. It only needs your presence. Because once inside, the cell speaks for itself. Without words, without sound. Only with the raw, suffocating presence of something that endured long after the last prisoner was removed. Even the infamous Al Capone, one of the most notorious criminals in American history, is said to still haunt the halls of Alcatraz. During his time in the prison, Capone was no longer the feared kingpin of organized crime. He was a sick, broken man, physically deteriorating from neurosyphilis and mentally unraveling with each passing day. Gone were the days of luxury and control. At Alcatraz, he was inmate number 85, stripped of his empire and placed in a cell like any other. But unlike most prisoners, Capone found solace in music. Toward the end of his sentence, he was often seen playing the banjo during his recreation periods. He joined the prison band, and when paranoia overtook him, he began requesting to play in the prison showers alone, away from other inmates. He believed someone would try to kill him, even behind bars. That fear, combined with his mental decline, transformed him into a shell of the powerful man he once was. After his release and eventual death, strange stories began to emerge from the guards who once watched over him, and from staff who returned to the prison in later years. Even after the prison shut down, the faint sound of banjo music was reportedly heard echoing from the shower area. It was always faint, distant, and fleeting, as though carried on the wind or buried deep within the walls themselves. At first, many dismissed these claims as imagination or tricks of the acoustics, but the reports became too numerous and too specific to ignore. Visitors began asking guides about the music they had heard, not realizing there was no functional instrument in the area, no performer, no sound system. The music wasn't loud, it was delicate, almost sorrowful, as if someone were strumming the strings out of habit rather than joy. Paranormal investigators who visited the site recorded audio of what they claimed sounded like soft stringed instruments playing in empty rooms. The pattern was always the same, brief snippets of melody that vanished before they could be traced. No explanation was ever found. No hidden speakers, no interference from passing boats, no external source to rationalize the sound. The shower area where Capone once played became a point of fascination for those sensitive to spiritual energy. Several visitors reported feeling an overwhelming sadness in that space, as though someone was still there, desperately clinging to the one thing that gave them peace in their final days. One guest described it as stepping into a forgotten memory, a moment frozen in time, where the past continued to replay itself, whether anyone was watching or not. Capone's ghost, if that's what it is, doesn't appear with chains or threats. It appears through music, through a melody that haunts rather than terrifies. That subtlety is what makes it so disturbing. It isn't dramatic or loud, it's quiet, melancholic, and deeply human. It's the sound of regret. The sound of a man who had once held entire cities in fear, now reduced to playing tunes in isolation, stripped of his power and mind. Some believe the music is his way of expressing what he could never say, a final plea for peace, or perhaps a desperate denial of guilt. Others say Capone's spirit is trapped not because of the crimes he committed, but because of the torment he endured during his last years. Mental illness, isolation, and physical decay left him broken, and in that brokenness something may have been left behind. Alcatraz didn't just imprison Capone's body, it buried his identity, his control, and his pride. The man who once controlled criminal empires ended up in a tiled shower room, clinging to music to quiet the voices in his mind. And now, it seems, that music plays on, as if the island remembers the man, even when history tries to forget. This phenomenon is unlike the typical ghost stories of angry spirits or terrifying apparitions. It's softer, more intimate, and in many ways more tragic. To hear music where there should be none is to feel the presence of something unresolved. Whether it's truly Capone's spirit or merely the echoes of intense human emotion, the banjo continues to be heard by those willing, or perhaps fated, to listen. It's a reminder that even the most powerful among us can fall, and when they do, the remnants of their soul may cling to the last thing that made them feel human. In Capone's case, it was the strings of a banjo echoing in the emptiness of a prison that refused to let him go. The emotional energy of inmates who experienced isolation, hopelessness, and mental torment seems to have imprinted itself into the very foundation of Alcatraz. This prison wasn't just built from concrete and steel, it was built from pain. Every inch of it reflects the weight of human suffering that once pulsed through its corridors. Unlike other prisons, Alcatraz was designed to break the spirit, not just confine the body. Inmates were cut off from the mainland, surrounded by freezing waters that symbolized both a barrier and a threat. There was no hope of escape, and even hope itself became a kind of torment. The men who were sent there were not just punished physically, they were psychologically erased. And in that process, something intangible but powerful was left behind. Many prisoners were forced into long periods of silence, solitude, and deprivation. Solitary confinement meant days or even weeks without hearing another human voice. The mind, under such pressure, begins to hallucinate, fracture, and twist. Some inmates screamed for hours into the darkness, not knowing if anyone was listening. Others sank into a silence so deep it was as if they ceased to exist. These psychological wounds didn't fade with time. They accumulated, and while the inmates eventually left the island, their pain, despair, and fear seemed to embed themselves into the walls. Today, that energy still lingers like an unseen fog. Paranormal experts often speak of locations absorbing emotional residue, especially places where fear, anger, or sorrow has been deeply concentrated. Alcatraz fits that description perfectly. The repetition of trauma created an emotional echo that never fully faded. Even visitors with no belief in the supernatural often report a heavy, almost suffocating feeling when walking through certain cell blocks. They describe it as a pressure in the chest or a fog in the mind, like stepping into a room where something unspeakable has happened. It's not always terrifying. Sometimes it's just overwhelmingly sad. That sadness seeps into the bones, and for some, it follows them long after they leave. Guards and staff weren't immune to this energy either. Many reported disturbing dreams, intense anxiety, and a sense of unease that would last for days after working certain shifts. One former guard shared that, even decades after leaving his post, he still hears the faint sounds of metal doors clanging and men crying out in the night. He said the prison became a part of him, not physically, but emotionally, like a haunting memory that refused to fade. He believed the energy of the inmates had not only marked the prison, but had stained the memories of everyone who worked there. There are sections of Alcatraz that seem to carry more of this emotional weight than others. The old hospital ward, for instance, where prisoners were left to die alone, is often described as the most emotionally intense area of the island. Visitors report sudden tears, feelings of abandonment, and nausea. Some say it feels like walking through a place where grief itself was born. The walls are cracked and faded, but the atmosphere remains raw. It's as though the suffering that took place there still lingers just beneath the surface, invisible but deeply present. Many who visit Alcatraz speak of how the air changes when they step into certain areas. It becomes colder, heavier. There is no breeze, no shift in weather, just a change in energy. This sensation often happens in places where inmates endured the worst punishments, the isolation cells, the disciplinary barracks, and the mess hall during lockdowns. These places became breeding grounds for mental deterioration, and some believe that deterioration carved itself into the physical space. Time doesn't feel normal in these areas. Minutes stretch, and the mind grows restless. It's as if the place remembers what it did to the people who lived there. Inmates often wrote letters pleading for human contact, for transfer, for mercy that never came. Some carved into the walls, leaving behind desperate marks. Names, dates, sometimes just scratches. These markings, faded but still visible, act as physical proof of the emotional breakdown that occurred behind those bars. They are silent screams, frozen in time. For those who look closely, they are the fingerprints of trauma left behind by men who knew they were meant to be forgotten. Alcatraz is more than an old prison. It's a storage house for emotional remnants, where the worst human experiences, despair, loneliness, madness, were not just felt but magnified. What remains today isn't just rust and decay. It's a presence, an emotional aftershock that continues to affect those who step inside. The echoes aren't always heard with ears. They're felt in the chest, the skin, the soul. Nature itself appears to react to the haunted aura of Alcatraz. Birds avoid nesting on certain rooftops, and the surrounding ocean seems unnaturally quiet. While these might seem like subtle signs to the average observer, those who have spent time studying the island know they are anything but ordinary. Alcatraz, for all its concrete and steel, sits surrounded by nature, but even the natural world seems hesitant to embrace it. In a region where seabirds thrive and ocean life teems beneath the surface, the island remains strangely barren in places. Certain buildings, particularly the decaying warden's house and the old hospital wing, remain untouched by the usual signs of life. No nests line their beams, no birds perch along their ledges. It is as though some instinct tells wildlife to stay away, to avoid the invisible weight pressing down on these areas. Biologists have attempted to explain these behaviors through environmental factors. Perhaps the wind currents are wrong or the structure's conditions are not ideal for nesting. But such explanations fall short when one considers how nearby structures of similar material and design are bustling with wildlife. The absence on Alcatraz is too deliberate, too precise. It's as if some parts of the island carry an unseen barrier that not even animals wish to cross. Some researchers have documented birds approaching these rooftops only to veer off suddenly, as though struck by an invisible wall of discomfort. Their avoidance has become one of the subtle but persistent signs that Alcatraz is different. The ocean itself, which normally speaks in waves and murmurs, seems hushed near the shores of the island. There is a calmness in the water that feels more like restraint than peace. On many days, the waters are strangely still, with barely a ripple lapping at the rocks. Fishermen and sailors who pass by have remarked on the unnatural silence that surrounds the island. Boats slow down instinctively, and voices drop in volume, as though in reverence or subconscious fear. It's not just a visual stillness. It's an energy, a quiet that carries weight, like the world itself is holding its breath around the island. Some divers and marine researchers have noted odd readings in the waters surrounding Alcatraz. Shifts in temperature, brief magnetic disturbances, and unnatural calm zones. They often return with more questions than answers. Several have reported a sense of being watched while diving near the island's base, even though no one is around. Equipment malfunctions, sound distortions, and strange pressure changes are frequently encountered. These aren't simply mechanical issues. They often correlate with exact areas where paranormal activity is reported inside the prison itself, suggesting a strange connection between the energy above and below the surface. Nature is usually indifferent to human suffering. Trees grow over battlegrounds, rivers flow through ancient ruins, birds nest in crumbled temples. But on Alcatraz, nature behaves differently. It's as if the pain, fear, and isolation that once permeated the prison walls have pushed even the most resilient forms of life to keep their distance. This rejection by the natural world is unsettling, a quiet acknowledgement that something is wrong. Some spiritual thinkers believe that animals are more in tune with energy than humans, able to detect danger or unrest where we see nothing. If that's true, then the avoidance of Alcatraz by wildlife might be the most honest confirmation of its haunted legacy. Visitors often speak of the eerie quiet that settles over the island, especially during early morning or late afternoon. The usual sounds of bird song or crashing waves are strangely absent. Instead, there's a blanket of silence that wraps around the island like a shroud. Even the wind seems to move differently, more of a whisper than a breeze. Guides have shared stories of flocks of birds suddenly taking off as one, startled by nothing visible. Animals sense what we cannot, and on Alcatraz they seem to be warning us to tread lightly, to not linger too long. This unusual behavior of nature has become part of the island's legend, It's not dramatic or theatrical like ghost sightings or eerie sounds, but it's perhaps more powerful in its subtlety. The refusal of birds to nest, the silence of the sea, the shifting energy of the wind, all serve as quiet, persistent reminders that something unnatural has claimed this place. The island doesn't just look haunted, it feels rejected by the world around it, held at arm's length, even by the earth and sea. Alcatraz stands alone not just because of its location, but because nothing, not even nature, seems willing to embrace what lies at its core. Alcatraz doesn't just draw tourists for its history, but for a chilling emotional experience. Many visitors leave feeling disturbed, heavy, or spiritually affected. While most expect to tour an old prison, take photographs of weathered cell blocks, and learn about infamous criminals like Al Capone or Machine Gun Kelly, what they actually encounter goes far beyond historical curiosity. The moment people step onto the island, something shifts. There's a mood, a sensation, a subtle but undeniable force that weighs down the heart and mind. It's not always easy to describe. Some say it feels like sadness. Others describe it as dread or pressure. But nearly all agree it's something you carry with you when you leave. People often arrive excited, full of energy, talking and laughing as the ferry approaches the island, but by the time they leave, their tone has changed. Conversations become quieter, movements slower, expressions more serious. It's as though the island takes something from them, a piece of lightness, and replaces it with something heavier. Many visitors report feeling anxious or deeply introspective during their time in the prison. They walk through the narrow halls, peer into rusted cells, and find themselves overwhelmed with emotions that don't feel like their own. Some break into tears for no clear reason. Others feel nausea or dizziness in certain rooms. It's not the heat or lack of air. It's the atmosphere itself, charged with invisible weight. Tour guides have grown used to this phenomenon. They speak in respectful tones, aware that they are leading people through more than just a ruin. Some guides say they've seen guests turn pale and rush outside after only a few minutes inside the D block or the old infirmary. Others report tourists standing still for long periods in specific cells, seemingly transfixed by something unseen. Some of the most chilling moments happen when a guest begins to describe a feeling or image, only to be told they've unknowingly described a historical event that took place in that very spot. These aren't just moments of imagination. They seem to be echoes, emotional imprints that rise to the surface for those sensitive enough or open enough to receive them. What's especially unsettling is that these experiences are often shared by people who had no prior belief in ghosts or energy. Tourists from all walks of life, different cultures and belief systems, report similar emotional reactions. Some say they felt grief, as if mourning someone they never knew. Others say they were overcome by a sense of being watched, judged, or even followed. Some leave the island only to find that the feeling persists. Dreams become vivid, emotions feel out of balance, or memories arise that seem disconnected from personal experience. Psychologists might call this suggestibility, but the intensity and consistency across countless unrelated people suggests something deeper is at work. For some visitors, the experience is even more physical. Sudden headaches, racing heartbeats, trembling hands, and unexplained body aches often occur in certain wings of the prison. They may disappear within minutes of leaving those areas. Many describe a sensation of pressure on the chest, like being underwater or trapped. Others say they feel like the walls are closing in, even in wide corridors. The mental strain of being surrounded by the lingering energy of suffering and confinement becomes more than symbolic. It becomes somatic, affecting body and mind alike. Those who are particularly sensitive to emotional environments, empaths, spiritual practitioners, or simply those attuned to subtle feelings, often describe Alcatraz as an overwhelming place, One woman, after walking through the main block, had to sit on a bench and cry for 20 minutes. She later said it felt like thousands of people were trying to speak through her. Another man, who had never believed in anything supernatural, left the island in silence and admitted to his partner, "I don't know what happened in there, but I don't feel right." What adds to this mysterious pull is the contrast between the beauty surrounding the island and the energy contained within it. The views of San Francisco Bay are breathtaking. The ocean sparkles, the city skyline rises in the distance, and the breeze carries the scent of salt and seaweed. Yet on the island itself, the air is heavy. It's a jarring contradiction. Nature offering light while the prison clings to darkness. That imbalance becomes emotional for many. It's a reminder that appearances deceive, that beauty can hide deep wounds, and that some places carry burdens no time can erase. Alcatraz is more than a relic of justice or punishment. It is a place where human emotion was compressed, denied, and buried. But it didn't vanish, it lingered. And today, it reaches out not through haunted apparitions, but through quiet grief, unexplained pressure, and emotional echoes that find their way into the hearts of those who dare to walk its path. Visitors leave with more than photos. They leave with feelings that aren't entirely their own. Alcatraz Island is haunted, but not only by ghosts. It is haunted by justice, by cruelty, by stories that were never told and sentences that were never finished. The haunting presence on the island does not always appear in the form of apparitions or cold spots or eerie sounds in the night. Instead, it often manifests as the weight of the past itself, a thick, invisible force that seems to drift through the air, cling to the walls, and saturate the very atmosphere. The people who walk through those abandoned corridors are not just tourists. They are silent witnesses to unresolved history, participants in a story that still demands to be heard. The cells may be empty, but the energy of desperation, guilt, fear, and silence remains, like ink that has soaked deep into paper and can never be erased. Alcatraz was meant to be the end of the line. It was designed for those deemed unfit to live among others, criminals so dangerous that only an island fortress could contain them. But in its attempt to control, to isolate, and to punish, it did something else. It erased identities. It reduced complex human beings into numbers and stripped them of every personal connection. Over time, the island became a symbol of what happens when punishment forgets the soul. And it is that forgetting, the deliberate, mechanical extinguishing of humanity, that still haunts the place today. Some visitors speak of hearing voices in empty cells. Others say they see shadows dart across doorways or feel someone standing behind them when no one is there. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect is not the supernatural, but the deeply human. The haunting of Alcatraz is also made up of unfinished stories. Prisoners who died with words still unspoken. Men who were never forgiven. Families who never received closure. It is haunted by justice that wasn't always fair, by punishments that outlived the crimes, and by the echo of footsteps from men who walked their last miles in silence. The haunting comes not from something evil, but from something unresolved. Many of the inmates who lived and died on the island were battling more than the justice system. They were fighting their own minds, their own trauma, their own brokenness. For some, the cells were cages. For others, they were escape from a deeper madness. Those walls held men who had been shaped by poverty, war, violence, and a society that had no answers for their pain. The ghosts that remain may not be there to scare, but to be seen, to be acknowledged as more than their crimes, as human beings who lost their way and were never found again. Even the guards, those meant to maintain control, were not immune. Many spent years living on the island, raising families in nearby quarters, feeling the tension every day. They, too, were trapped, not in cells, but in routine, silence, and emotional restraint. Some reported dreams they couldn't shake, anxieties that followed them home, and a growing sense that the island was absorbing their emotions. Decades later, some returned and found the memories just as vivid, the emotions just as raw. Alcatraz didn't just imprison the guilty, it infected everyone who touched it. There's a heaviness in the air, a kind of historical pressure that bends down on the shoulders of those who walk its corridors. It doesn't matter if you believe in ghosts or not, Alcatraz has a way of speaking to everyone. To some it whispers with the voice of a prisoner who never left. To others, it murmurs with the guilt of choices that cannot be undone. Sometimes, it's just a silence that speaks louder than words, filling the space with a sense that the past is still watching. People leave the island changed, not always in ways they understand. They think they're going to see a prison, to learn about famous criminals and legendary escapes, but they walk into a deeper story. One written in shadows, carried on cold winds and echoed in the cracks of the concrete. It's a story about punishment and isolation, about regret and memory, about what happens when a place holds too much pain for time to erase. The tour ends, the ferry departs, but for many, something follows them. A feeling, a question, a weight. Alcatraz doesn't need to scream to be heard, it only needs to be felt. And once it's felt, it's never truly forgotten. The island may look like a ruin, but it is more alive than it appears. Not alive with joy or growth, but with the memory of every soul who passed through its gates. It is haunted by choices, by silence, and by the shadows of those who were left behind. Not every ghost wears chains. Some wear silence, some wear sorrow. And on Alcatraz, those are the ones you feel most.